Good morning. I'm Vijay Madhvi. Let's start with our new concept, that is synchronous and asynchronous data transmission. What is meant by the synchronous data transmission? See, whenever if we have a need of data transmission between the sender and receiver, okay? For example, if we have a transmission, okay, if we have a transmission between the sender and receiver, then we may have either it is a synchronous transmission or it is a asynchronous transmission. What is meant by the synchronous transmission? In this synchronous transmission, the data is sent in the form of blocks. The data is sent in the form of blocks or frames. Okay. And here, like whenever if we have a transmission of data between the sender as well as the receiver, between the sender and receiver, we have a data transmission, then the data is divided in the form of blocks. Okay. And here the transmission is the full duplex transmission. Why we are going to call it as a full duplex transmission? If we have a transmission between the sender and receiver from both the sides at a time, then we can call it as a full duplex transmission. Okay. And here, for example, if we have like if we have a telephone conversation, there it is called as a full duplex communication, because at a time both can speak as well as can receive, it is possible. Understand? It is called as a full duplex transmission. Finally, what I can say, what is mean by this synchronous transmission means what? What is what is mean by this synchronous transmission means what? Here the data is transmitted between the sender and receiver in the form of blocks, as well as the transmission is in the full duplex type. Okay. And between the sender and receiver, the synchronization is also compulsory. Whenever if I have this synchronous transmission, there is no gap between the data. It is more efficient and more reliable than asynchronous transmission. Whenever if we have a synchronous transmission, it is more efficient as well as more reliable than synchronous transmission. Okay. And here what is meant by this synchronous transmission? What I can say, here, synchronous transmission means what? Here, if the data is transmitted in the form of blocks between the client and server, I can say between the sender and receiver. Now I can say in synchronous transmission, the data is transmitted in the form of blocks or frames. Okay. And here, like whenever if we have a transmission of data between the sender and receiver, then the flow of data will be divided in the form of frames. It is called as a synchronous transmission. I can say the best example for the synchronous transmission are, especially we can say as a telephone conversation is the best example I can say for the synchronous transmission. And chat rooms, video calling, all these are also comes under the synchronous communication or transmission only. Okay. And finally, what I can say here, in the synchronous transmission, the data is sent in the form of blocks or frames. And finally, the important point which we have to understand about the synchronous transmission is it is a full duplex type. And when compared to the asynchronous transmission, synchronous transmission is more better. Okay, that means here it is more efficient and more reliable than asynchronous transmission. Okay, and here in the synchronous transmission, what is happening? Equally, the data is divided. Okay, and it is going to be transmitted between the client and server, or I can say sender and receiver. And what is mean by asynchronous transmission? Here, in asynchronous transmission, the data is sent in the form of bytes or characters. Okay. Here, the best example for the asynchronous transmission, what I can say is email, forums, letters. Here, whenever if we have sent an email, that means see, here we have three different types of transmission. One is a, like I can say, simplex, half duplex, as well as full duplex. Here we can say, here whenever if we have the different types of transmissions are, what I can say, we have simplex transmission and we have half duplex transmission, and we have the full duplex transmission. What is mean by simplex transmission? Okay, it is very a one media of transmission. Okay, and here What is meant by half duplex transmission? In half duplex, what is happening? Only one way is happening at a time. At a time, here at a time, only one way transmission. Only one way transmission we have. Okay. But whenever if we have full duplex, at a time, here at a time, we have two-way transmission. Okay. And here, whenever if I have this synchronous transmission, whenever if we have the synchronous transmission, in synchronous transmission, we have this full duplex transmission. But whenever if I have this asynchronous transmission, there we have only half duplex transmission. That means in this transmission, we have the start bits and stop bits are added with the data. And it does not have any requirement. It does not have any requirement. Okay. And that means see here, it does not require any synchronization. All those things are not needed. Okay. And whenever if we have a synchronous transmission, in synchronous transmission, the data is sent. Finally, very simple manner, I can say. What is meant by synchronous transmission? The data is sent in the form of blocks or frames. The synchronous transmission, I can say it is a full duplex transmission. And here, when compared to the asynchronous transmission, the synchronous transmission is more better. Okay. And here, the data is transmitted between the sender and receiver. The data is in the form of blocks. Whenever if I have this asynchronous transmission, what it is called? Here, the data is sent in the form of bytes or characters. Here, in this asynchronous transmission, here for each and every transmission, we have a start bit as well as stop bit. Okay. Here, start bit, it enters the data. Okay. Stop bit, it is ends. This is the data. That means the start bit is 0 here and stop bit is 1 here. For the asynchronous transmission, we have to add the start bit and stop bits are added with the data. Okay. And it does not require any synchronization. Now, I think you understand. What is in the asynchronous transmission, what is happening? The data is sent in the form of byte or character. And simply I can say this asynchronous transmission is a half duplex type of transmission. In this transmission, we should add the start bit and stop bits are added with the data. Okay. And here you just see in this example, here we have a flow of data. We have a sender as well as receiver. And the data is in the form of frames. Okay. And for each and every frame, we have a start bit is there and stop bit is there. Then we have this data part. Understand? Okay. This is called as asynchronous transmission. And simply we can say, finally, when compared to the asynchronous transmission, the synchronous transmission is more reliable. Okay. And now we'll see the examples. Sorry, we see the differences. Okay. In the example means, the best example for the synchronous transmission means telephone conversation. The best example for the asynchronous transmission is email. Okay. First one is the email, forum, letter, all these things will be there. But as these days we are using with the email a lot, that's why I'm giving the example as a email. Okay. Next. And now we'll see finally what is the differences between synchronous and asynchronous transmission. See, for the exam point of view, here you may, if you get a question on like what is the mean by synchronous, asynchronous means, with the explanation of the synchronous, asynchronous, you have to give the differences also. If it is a long answer question, and if it is a short answer question, you just give only the explanation of synchronous and asynchronous transmission. That is enough. Okay. But most probably you can expect the 7 marks question. Okay. And here in synchronous transmission, the data is sent in the form of block or frames, as we know. In asynchronous transmission, the data is sent in the form of bytes or characters. And I said the synchronous transmission is fast and this asynchronous transmission is slow. When compared to the asynchronous transmission, the synchronous transmission is more costly. Okay. And in the synchronous transmission, the time interval of transmission is constant. Okay. It does not change. But in the asynchronous transmission, the time interval of transmission is not constant. Okay. And here in this synchronous transmission, the users has to wait till the transmission is complete, okay, before getting a response back from the server. And in asynchronous transmission, users do not have to wait for the completion of the transmission. Okay, in synchronous transmission, the users has to wait for the transmission. And in asynchronous transmission, the users do not have to wait for the completion of transmission. Okay, and in synchronous transmission, there is no gap present between the data. Whenever if I have this asynchronous transmission, there is a gap present between the data. And efficient use of transmission lines is done with synchronous transmission. And while in asynchronous transmission, the transmission line remains empty during a gap in character transmission. And here, the start and stop bits are not used for the transmission of data in the synchronous transmission. But whenever if I have this asynchronous, the start and stop bits are used in transmitting the data that imposes extra overhead. Okay. And whenever if I have this synchronous transmission, it needs precisely synchronized clocks for the information of new bytes. But whenever if I have this asynchronous, it does not need any synchronized clocks. Okay. As here, anyhow, we have the start bit and stop bit are going to be used. There I can say is called as a parity bit, which is used in this transmission. And errors are detected and corrected in real time. But here in this, errors are detected and corrected when the data is received. That means at the time of data transmission, if any error occurs, immediately it is going to be solved. But whenever if I have this email system, it will not be solved immediately. Am I right? Now, the low latency due to real-time communication. And here we have a high latency. Okay. And here the best example for this synchronous transmission is telephone conversation, video conference, as well as online game. Whenever if I have this asynchronous means I have this email, file transfer, as well as online forms. All these are comes under this asynchronous transmission. Okay. And finally, I can say, as per my knowledge, I can say the synchronous transmission is more better when compared to the asynchronous transmission. Okay.